The massive council chamber on Zephyria Prime fell silent as Ambassador Veltar's three eyes widened in terror. The creature's blue-scaled face twisted with fear as the holographic display flickered to life above the center table. What everyone saw made even the bravest delegates lean back in their seats. The images showed complete destruction. An entire colony world that once housed millions of beings now lay empty and broken. Cities that had stood for centuries were reduced to smoking ruins. The ground was stained with dark patches where blood had pooled and dried. Scattered across the landscape were massive claw marks gouged deep into metal buildings, each scratch mark as wide as a grown person. The hunting season approaches the outer rim, Veltar announced to the assembled delegates, his voice shaking despite his attempt to sound official. The Keth Mori have claimed 17 worlds in the past cycle. The chamber buzzed with nervous whispers. Delegates from dozens of different species shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some had tentacles that writhed anxiously, others had feathers that stood on end, and a few had started changing colors as their fear grew. Jerome Thompson, the newly appointed human ambassador, leaned forward in his seat. The tall man with dark skin and graying hair studied the carnage on screen with cold, analytical eyes. Unlike the other delegates, he wasn't trembling or showing obvious signs of fear. Instead, he looked like someone studying a problem that needed solving. These Keth Mori, Jerome said slowly, his deep voice cutting through the worried chatter, how long have they been doing this? A collective shudder ran through the alien delegates. Several actually moaned in despair. Veltar's universal translator crackled as he responded, clearly struggling to find the right words. For over 3,000 of your Earth years, Ambassador Thompson. They are the apex predators of our galaxy. Nothing can stand against them. Nothing has ever even tried to fight back successfully. Jerome raised an eyebrow. Nothing? Nothing, Veltar confirmed, his three eyes blinking in sequence. They are massive creatures, standing 4 meters tall. That's over 13 feet in your human measurements. They have natural armor plating that's thicker and stronger than our best battle steel. Their claws can slice through reinforced hulls like your people might cut through paper. The holographic display shifted, showing grainy footage of a Keth Mori warrior. The creature was indeed massive, with a reptilian body covered in thick, overlapping scales that looked like natural armor. Its arms ended in claws that gleamed like polished metal, each one longer than a human forearm. The most terrifying part was its intelligence. The creature's eyes showed cunning and planning, not just animal instinct. They hunt in coordinated packs, Veltar continued, his voice growing weaker. Sometimes just 3 or 4, sometimes dozens. They plan their attacks like your greatest military strategists. They study their prey for months, learning weaknesses and habits. When they strike, it's always perfectly timed and completely overwhelming. The display showed more footage of Keth Mori attacks. The creatures moved with frightening coordination, using advanced tactics that would impress any military academy. They used distraction techniques, flanking maneuvers, and even psychological warfare to break their enemies before the real fighting began. Every species that has encountered them has either been completely consumed or has learned to hide in the deepest, most remote corners of space, Veltar said. We've all developed early warning systems, underground bunkers, and evacuation procedures. Some civilizations have moved their entire populations to hidden worlds that don't appear on any star charts. Jerome exchanged a long look with Colonel Patricia Davis, the human military attaché. The woman had been sitting quietly beside him, taking notes on her tablet. Her dark face remained calm, but Jerome noticed the way her jaw tightened slightly. He'd worked with military people long enough to recognize that look. It wasn't fear. It was the expression someone gets when they're already thinking about how to solve a problem. We appreciate the warning, Jerome said diplomatically, his voice carrying the practiced tone of someone who'd spent years in negotiations. But humanity doesn't typically hide from threats. It's not really in our nature. The chamber erupted in alarmed chatter. Delegates started talking over each other in dozens of different languages. The universal translators struggled to keep up with all the overlapping conversations. Some delegates were clearly trying to warn the humans, others seemed to be making plans to distance themselves from Earth, and a few appeared to be praying to whatever gods their species worshipped. Veltar's voice rose above the noise, his translator crackling with urgency. You don't understand. The Keth Mori don't negotiate. They don't make deals or treaties. They don't take prisoners except for breeding stock to ensure future hunts. They don't show mercy, pity, or any emotion except hunger and the joy of hunting. They are perfect killing machines that have evolved over millions of years to be unstoppable predators. The alien ambassador's 3 arms gestured frantically at the holographic display. Look at these images. These aren't random attacks or territorial disputes. This is systematic hunting. They take only the best specimens alive and kill everything else. They turn entire worlds into hunting preserves for their young to practice on. There is no negotiating with them, no reasoning with them, and definitely no defeating them. Patricia finally spoke, her voice quiet but carrying clearly through the chamber. So are we. The simple statement hit the room like a physical blow. The chatter stopped instantly. Every delegate turned to stare at the two humans, trying to understand what they meant. Jerome stood slowly, his impressive height making him tower over most of the alien delegates. I think what Colonel Davis means is that humans have dealt with apex predators before. We've had quite a bit of experience with creatures that others considered unstoppable. He paused, looking around the room at all the frightened faces. On Earth, we had creatures that were bigger, stronger, and more dangerous than us. We had predators with teeth and claws that could tear us apart. We had beasts that hunted in packs and showed no mercy. Where are they now? Patricia added quietly. The question hung in the air like smoke. The alien delegates looked confused, not understanding the implication. Jerome smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. Extinct. 3 months had passed since that tense meeting in the Galactic Council chamber. Now, the UES Prometheus drifted slowly through what used to be one of humanity's most important research stations. Captain James Miller stood on the bridge, his weathered face showing the strain of too many sleepless nights. The gray at his temples had gotten more pronounced since taking command of this deep space mission. Through the massive view screen, twisted metal and debris floated in the cold vacuum of space. What had once been Kepler Station, home to over 3,000 researchers and their families, was now nothing more than scattered wreckage drifting through the void. Same signature as the other attacks, reported Lieutenant Ashley Brown from her position at the tactical station. The young officer's voice was steady, but Miller could hear the underlying tension. She'd been studying these attack patterns for weeks now, and each one told the same horrifying story. Ashley's fingers danced across her console, bringing up detailed scans on her screen. Plasma scoring along all the major hull sections. The metal has been superheated and then rapidly cooled, creating these distinctive burn patterns. But look at these other marks. She highlighted sections of the wreckage where something had clearly torn through reinforced steel plating. The tears weren't random or chaotic. They showed deliberate, precise cutting patterns. Structural tears consistent with massive claws, Ashley continued, her voice growing quieter. Whatever did this was incredibly strong and knew exactly where to strike for maximum damage. They targeted life support systems first, then communication arrays, then escape pod bays. The bridge crew exchanged grim looks. This wasn't just destruction for the sake of destruction. This was systematic hunting behavior. The attackers had methodically eliminated any chance of escape or calling for help before moving in for the kill. "Sir," called out Ensign Robert Davis from the communication station. The young man's voice cracked slightly with nervous energy. "We're picking up movement in the asteroid field. Large contacts, moving our way. They're closing fast." Miller felt his pulse quicken, but his voice remained calm and authoritative. "How many contacts, Ensign?" Robert's hands flew over his console, trying to get clearer readings through all the debris and electromagnetic interference from the destroyed station. "I'm reading at least 3, possibly more. Sir, these aren't normal ship signatures. The power readings are off the charts, and the hull configurations don't match anything in our databases." Miller straightened in his captain's chair, his military training taking over. "Battle stations. All hands, prepare for contact with hostile forces." Red alert klaxons began blaring throughout the ship. The bridge lighting shifted to emergency amber as crew members across the vessel rushed to their combat positions. Miller could hear the distant sound of feet running through corridors as his people prepared for what might be their first real encounter with the galaxy's most feared predators. The first Keth-Mori hunter ship emerged from behind a massive asteroid like some kind of metallic nightmare. The vessel was unlike anything human engineers had ever designed. Where human ships were angular and functional, built for efficiency and durability, this thing looked like it had grown rather than been constructed. Its hull was covered in what appeared to be natural armor plating, overlapping scales that gleamed dully in the starlight. The ship's design combined sleek, organic curves with obvious predatory features. Weapon ports looked like gaping mouths, and sensor arrays resembled glowing eyes scanning for prey. 2 more identical ships flanked the first one, moving in perfect formation. Their coordination was flawless, like a pack of wolves surrounding a wounded deer. They didn't approach in a straight line like most military vessels would. Instead, They curved and circled, clearly trying to position themselves for optimal attack angles. "Incoming transmission," Robert announced, his voice barely above a whisper. The view screen flickered and shifted, static lines dancing across the display before clearing to reveal something that made several bridge crew members gasp in shock. The creature on screen was massive, easily 4 meters tall even while seated. Its reptilian features were a nightmare combination of intelligence and pure predatory menace. The being's scales were a deep green-black color that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Its eyes were large and multifaceted, clearly designed for tracking movement and spotting prey from great distances. But the most terrifying feature was its mouth. When it opened to speak, rows of razor-sharp teeth gleamed like polished knives. "Humans," the creature said, its voice somehow perfectly clear despite the alien vocal cords. The universal translator had obviously been studying human broadcasts for some time, because its English was flawless, though tinged with an accent that sounded like grinding stone. "We have studied your species through your broadcasts that leak into space. Your entertainment programs, your news reports, your military communications. You will make excellent prey. Your ship will be our trophy, and your crew will provide sustenance for our young." The creature's laugh was like the sound of metal scraping against metal. "You are soft creatures, dependent on your machines and your technology. When those fail you, you have nothing but weak flesh and fragile bones. We have been hunting and killing for millions of years. You have existed for barely a moment in galactic terms." Miller stood slowly, his full height making him an impressive figure even compared to the alien monster on screen. His voice carried the authority of someone who had commanded respect through decades of military service. "I'm Captain Miller of the United Earth ship Prometheus. You've attacked our facilities and killed our people. I'm ordering you to stand down immediately and surrender yourselves for questioning regarding acts of war against human colonies." The Kethmori leader's reaction was immediate and terrifying. It threw back its massive head and laughed, a sound that seemed to echo through the bridge speakers like the roar of some ancient predator. When it looked back at the camera, its eyes were glowing with what could only be described as pure amusement. "No prey has ever demanded surrender from the hunters," the creature said, its voice dripping with condescension. "You amuse us greatly, little human. We will take you alive so you may witness firsthand how apex predators feed. Consider it an education in your place in the natural order." The transmission cut abruptly, leaving the bridge in tense silence for exactly 3 seconds. "Sir." Ashley's voice cut through the quiet like a knife. 3 more ships decloaking. They were hiding in the asteroid field. We're completely surrounded now. They're moving into what looks like a classic hunting formation. Miller looked around at his crew. These were good people, trained professionals who had volunteered for deep space exploration. They hadn't signed up to be prey for galactic monsters. But they were humans, and humans had faced impossible odds before. A slow smile spread across Miller's weathered face. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "Well, ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the bridge, "it looks like we're about to give these so-called apex predators their first lesson in human military doctrine. 20,000 years of warfare evolution, from stone axes to plasma cannons." He settled back into his captain's chair and looked directly at Ashley. "All weapons systems online. Target their engine signatures first, then communication arrays. Let's show them what happens when predators try to hunt other predators." "Aye, sir," Ashley replied, her fingers already working across her tactical console. "Weapons free and ready to engage." Miller's smile grew wider. "Let's hunt the hunters." 6 months had passed since the Battle of Kepler Station, and news of humanity's first victory against the Kethmori had spread throughout the galaxy like wildfire. What should have been impossible had happened. The creatures that had terrorized civilizations for 3,000 years had been defeated. Not just defeated, but completely destroyed. All 5 Kethmori hunting packs that attacked the human research station had been wiped out without a single survivor. Admiral Michael Thompson stood at the head of the massive war room deep beneath Earth's military headquarters. The broad-shouldered man with graying hair commanded respect from everyone in the room just by his presence. Behind him, holographic displays showed star maps, battle plans, and detailed analysis reports that had been compiled over the past months. Around the conference table sat the most important military and scientific minds on Earth. These weren't politicians looking for easy answers or bureaucrats worried about budgets. These were the people who would plan and execute humanity's response to the greatest threat they had ever faced. "Ladies and gentlemen," Admiral Thompson began, his deep voice carrying clearly through the room, "we are officially at war with a species that has terrorized this galaxy for millennia. They consider themselves apex predators. They've spent thousands of years believing nothing could challenge them. He paused, looking each person in the room directly in the eye. They're about to learn what that term really means when humans use it. General Patricia Williams stood up from her seat at the table. The athletic woman moved with the fluid grace of someone who had spent her entire adult life in active combat situations. She had personally led 3 successful raids into Keth Mori territory over the past months, gathering intelligence that no other species had ever managed to obtain. Our xenobiology teams have completed their comprehensive analysis of Keth Mori physiology and behavior patterns, she reported, activating her own section of the holographic display. The results are fascinating and, more importantly, they show us exactly how to win this war. Detailed images appeared in the air above the table. 3-dimensional models of Keth Mori anatomy, behavioral studies, and combat analysis filled the space around them. The data represented thousands of hours of careful study and observation. The Keth Mori are ambush predators, General Williams continued. They are incredibly powerful and intelligent, but their entire evolutionary development has adapted them for very specific hunting patterns. They strike fast, overwhelm their prey quickly, and then move on to the next target. They've never had to deal with persistence predators. Admiral Thompson leaned forward in his chair. Explain what you mean by persistence predators. Sir, every species the Keth Mori have encountered in their 3,000 years of galactic dominance has followed the same basic pattern. They either fight briefly and get overwhelmed, or they run away and try to hide. No one has ever fought back strategically over extended periods. General Williams manipulated the holographic display, showing star charts of previous Keth Mori attacks. The patterns were clear once you knew what to look for. Quick strikes, overwhelming force, then movement to the next target while the survivors went into hiding. They've never faced an enemy that tracks them across multiple star systems, studies their patterns for months, learns their weaknesses, and then adapts tactics faster than they can respond. They're used to prey that stays in one place and waits to be hunted. Dr. Kenneth Roberts, the chief xenobiologist who had been studying recovered Keth Mori remains, stood to present his findings. The older man had spent his entire career studying alien life forms, but nothing had prepared him for the complexity of what they were dealing with. The Keth Mori physiology is genuinely impressive, he admitted, highlighting specific sections of the anatomical models. Their natural armor plating is stronger than most manufactured materials. Their muscle density is nearly 3 times that of humans. Their sensory organs are incredibly advanced, and their intelligence is definitely on par with our own. He paused, then smiled in a way that made several people in the room uncomfortable. But every strength can become a weakness if you know how to exploit it. The display shifted to show detailed close-ups of Keth Mori joint structures. Their armor has necessary gaps at joint connections to allow for movement. These gaps are small, but they are consistent across all individuals we've studied. More importantly, their pack hierarchy creates completely predictable behavioral patterns. Dr. Roberts brought up communication intercepts and behavioral analysis charts. They operate in rigid social structures. The pack leader always positions himself in specific ways during combat. The subordinates follow predetermined formation patterns. They've been so successful for so long that they've become overconfident and predictable. Commander Lisa Jackson, who led the Psychological Warfare Division, had been sitting quietly during the presentations. Now she stood, and the smile on her face was colder than Arctic wind. We've spent the last 6 months studying not just their biology and tactics, but their psychology, she said. The Keth Mori hunt for dominance and territory. It's about power and control for them. They enjoy the fear they create, and they take trophies to prove their superiority. She activated another section of the display showing human historical data. Images of extinct Earth species flashed by, along with archaeological evidence of human expansion across the planet. We've studied human history extensively for this project. Humans don't hunt for dominance or territory or trophies. When humans decide something needs to die, we hunt for survival. And when humans hunt for survival, we don't stop until the threat is completely eliminated. The room fell silent as the implications of her words sank in. Commander Jackson continued, her voice growing even colder. Saber-toothed tigers were apex predators. Humans killed them all. Cave bears were apex predators. Humans killed them all. Giant wolves, massive crocodiles, terror birds that stood 3 meters tall and could outrun a horse. All apex predators. All extinct because humans decided they were threats. Admiral Thompson stood slowly, his imposing figure dominating the room. The Keth Mori made one critical error in judgment. They assumed that because they were the apex predator in this galaxy, they were the apex predator in the universe. He looked around the room at each of his officers and advisors. These were the people who would plan and execute the most important military campaign in human history. Operation Apex is hereby authorized, he announced. We will systematically locate and eliminate every Keth Mori military asset, hunting ground, breeding facility, and individual warrior. No prisoners will be taken. No negotiations will be attempted. No mercy will be shown. The holographic displays shifted to show preliminary attack plans, target locations, and resource allocation charts. This wasn't just a military campaign. This was preparation for species-wide extinction. They wanted to hunt humans, Admiral Thompson said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute determination. They declared war on our species when they attacked Kepler Station and killed our people. Now they're going to learn why Earth doesn't have any apex predators left. The room remained silent for several long moments as everyone absorbed what they had just committed to. Humanity had made a decision that would fundamentally change the balance of power in the galaxy. General Williams finally broke the silence. Sir, when do we begin? Admiral Thompson's smile was grim and final. We began 6 months ago when they killed the first human. Now we finish it. The war that would reshape the galaxy had officially begun. The Keth Mori war leader Thecamorn had ruled the Crimson Nebula hunting grounds for over 2 centuries. His massive form dominated the command chair of his flagship, a living testament to predatory perfection. Standing nearly 5 meters tall when fully upright, his dark green scales bore the ritual scars of 1,000 successful hunts. No prey had ever escaped his territory alive. His hunting grounds stretched across 12 star systems, and every species in the region knew to avoid the crimson glow of the nebula. Today, something was wrong. Terribly wrong. Alarms screamed through his flagship with an urgency that made his veteran crew nervous. The sound echoed through corridors that had never known defeat, bouncing off walls decorated with the skulls and bones of prey species from across the galaxy. Thecamorn's massive claws scraped against the metal armrests of his command chair as he tried to understand what was happening to his perfect hunting ground. Report, he snarled at his pack subordinates, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never been challenged. The bridge crew, all smaller Keth Mori who had earned their positions through years of successful hunts, scrambled at their stations. His tactical officer, a scarred veteran named Krelvas, looked up from his scanning console with confusion written across his reptilian features. 7 outer watch posts have gone silent in the past 3 hours, War Leader. No distress signals, no debris fields, no emergency beacons. They simply disappeared. Thecamorn's 3 eyes narrowed dangerously. In 200 years of hunting, nothing had ever approached his territory undetected, let alone eliminated his watch posts. These weren't just random guard stations. They were heavily armed battle stations, each one capable of destroying entire fleets of lesser species. Impossible, he growled, his voice like grinding stone. Show me the last transmission from Watch Post 7. The main view screen flickered to life, displaying the final moments recorded from the outermost watch post. The scene showed a typical Keth Mori guard station. 3 massive warriors stood at their monitoring stations, their natural armor gleaming under the artificial lights. Everything appeared normal for exactly 17 seconds. Then the lights went out. For a moment, the screen showed nothing but complete darkness. Then brief, brilliant flashes illuminated the scene like lightning strikes. Muzzle flashes from weapons fire lit up the command center in stroboscopic bursts. In those split-second moments of light, shadowy figures could be seen moving through the station with impossible speed and coordination. The Keth Mori guards roared and struck out with their massive claws, but they were fighting shadows. The intruders moved like ghosts, their one moment and gone the next. More weapon flashes lit up the darkness, and with each burst of light, fewer Keth Mori remained standing. The transmission cut to static. Thecamorn stared at the dead screen, his mind struggling to process what he had witnessed. How did they reach the watch posts undetected? He demanded. Our sensor networks cover every approach to this system. Nothing moves through the Crimson Nebula without us knowing about it. Before anyone could answer, the lights on the bridge flickered ominously. Emergency power systems activated automatically as something struck the hull with tremendous force. The impact sent vibrations through the massive ship, causing several crew members to stumble. Hull breach on Deck 7, reported the damage control officer, his voice tight with panic. No, wait. Multiple breaches. They're inside the ship. Deep within the corridors of the Keth Mori flagship, Lieutenant Danny Barnes led his squad through passages that reeked of death and old blood. The walls were decorated with hunting trophies from dozens of different species, a gruesome museum of the Keth Mori's conquests over the centuries. The human soldiers moved with deadly precision, their advanced camouflage systems rendering them nearly invisible in the dim lighting. Their armor absorbed and redirected light waves, making them appear as nothing more than slight distortions in the air. Behind Danny, Sergeant Nicole Turner coordinated with two other teams moving through different sections of the massive ship. Her voice came through their communication systems as barely a whisper, but every word was clear and precise. Team Alpha is in position near the engine room, she reported. Team Charlie has reached the command deck access corridors. All teams, remember your training. These creatures are ambush predators who rely on overwhelming force in close combat. Danny nodded, even though his teammates couldn't see the gesture through their camouflage. Copy that. We use movement, noise discipline, and superior coordination. Make them come to us, then hit them from 3 directions simultaneously. No heroics, no single combat. We're not here to prove we're tough. We're here to eliminate a threat. The first Keth Mori warrior rounded the corner ahead of them, its massive form filling the corridor. The creature stood over 4 meters tall, its natural armor plating gleaming dully in the artificial light. Its claws extended with a metallic sound as it sensed something wrong but couldn't quite identify the threat. Danny's entire team opened fire at exactly the same moment. Their armor-piercing rounds, specifically designed after months of studying Keth Mori anatomy, found the weak points in the creature's natural armor. The bullets struck the joint gaps with surgical precision, targeting nerve clusters and vital organs. The massive predator fell to the deck without making a sound, its brain shut down before it could even register pain. One down, Nicole reported over the comm system. All teams, maintain formation and continue with the plan. Target their joints and nerve clusters, exactly like we practiced in the simulations. On the bridge, Thecamorn watched his warriors fall one by one through the ship's internal monitoring systems. The humans moved through his vessel like some kind of deadly plague, coordinated and relentless in ways he had never seen before. These weren't warriors seeking honorable combat. These weren't prey animals fighting desperately for their lives. These humans hunted his people with cold, calculated efficiency that reminded him of something he had almost forgotten. It reminded him of how his own species hunted. But that was impossible. The Keth Mori were the apex predators of the galaxy. Nothing hunted them. War leader, his communications officer called out, his voice cracking with strain. We're receiving a transmission from the human fleet. The main screen activated, showing the bridge of a human warship. Admiral Michael Thompson appeared on screen, his weathered face showing no emotion whatsoever. Behind him, the human bridge crew worked at their stations with the same deadly efficiency that the soldiers inside the ship were demonstrating. This is Admiral Thompson of the United Earth Fleet, the human said, his voice calm and conversational. Your vessel is surrounded by our forces. You have 60 seconds to order your warriors to surrender before we demonstrate why humans eliminated every large predator species on our homeworld. Thecamorn rose to his full height, his massive form towering over his crew. His roar of defiance echoed through the bridge and could be heard throughout the ship. We are apex predators. We have ruled this galaxy for 3,000 years. We do not surrender to prey animals. Admiral Thompson's expression didn't change. If anything, he looked almost bored by the response. No, he replied calmly, his voice carrying the finality of a death sentence. You were apex predators. Past tense. Now you're extinct. The transmission ended abruptly. A moment later, the human fleet opened fire. But these weren't random attacks meant to destroy the ship quickly. The weapon's fire was precisely targeted at the flagship's critical systems. Life support, artificial gravity, emergency power, communication systems, and engine controls were systematically eliminated with surgical precision. Thecamorn realized with growing horror that the humans weren't trying to kill him quickly. They were taking apart his ship piece by piece, eliminating any possibility of escape or effective resistance. They were hunting him with the same methodical patience that his own species had used against prey for millennia. As the lights failed completely and emergency systems began shutting down one by one, the great predator finally understood what was happening. The humans hadn't come to fight the apex predators of the galaxy. They had come to replace them. 2 years had passed since the last confirmed Keth Mori sighting anywhere in the galaxy. The silence that followed their disappearance was unlike anything the galactic community had ever experienced. For 3,000 years, every species had lived with the constant fear that the great hunters might appear in their system at any moment. Now that fear was gone, replaced by something else entirely. The galaxy had grown quiet in a way that deeply unsettled its inhabitants. Trade routes that had been abandoned for centuries were slowly being reopened. Worlds that had hidden in the deepest, most remote corners of space were cautiously sending out exploration ships. But the quiet wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that comes after a massive storm has passed, when you're not sure if it's really over or if something even worse is coming. Ambassador Jerome Thompson stood before the Galactic Council in the same massive chamber where he had first learned about the Kethmori threat. The room looked exactly the same, with its towering ceiling and seats arranged for hundreds of different species. But everything else had changed. The delegates who filled those seats looked older, more tired, and somehow smaller than they had 2 years ago. Jerome straightened his shoulders and looked out over the assembled representatives. His voice carried clearly through the chamber's advanced sound systems, reaching every corner of the vast space. The Kethmori species is confirmed extinct, he announced with the same calm tone he might use to discuss weather patterns. All breeding facilities, military installations, hunting fleets, and individual warriors have been located and eliminated. The threat that terrorized this galaxy for 3 millennia no longer exists. The silence that followed was deafening. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Some delegates weren't even breathing. The weight of what they had just heard seemed to press down on the entire chamber like a physical force. Ambassador Veltar, who had first warned humanity about the Kethmori, looked older now and somehow diminished. His 3 eyes had lost their former brightness, and his blue scales had faded to a duller shade. When he finally found his voice, it came out as barely more than a whisper. "In 2 years, he said slowly, you accomplished what we believed impossible for 3,000. How? How did you do what entire galactic alliances couldn't manage in millennia of trying?" Jerome considered his words carefully. He understood that his answer would be remembered and repeated across the galaxy for generations to come. Every word would be analyzed and studied by xenobiologists, military strategists, and political scientists on thousands of worlds. "The Kethmori made one crucial error in judgment," he said finally. "They assumed that because they were the apex predator in this galaxy, they were the apex predator in the universe. They had never encountered anything like them, so they believed nothing like them existed." He paused, looking around the chamber at all the alien faces staring at him with expressions of fear, awe, and something that might have been respect. Earth produced many apex predators over its history. Creatures that were bigger, stronger, faster, and more dangerous than humans. Saber-toothed tigers with fangs longer than your arm. Cave bears that weighed more than small vehicles. Giant wolves that hunted in coordinated packs. Terror birds that stood 3 meters tall and could outrun any land animal. The chamber remained silent, hanging on every word. "Humans killed them all," Jerome said simply. "But surely," interjected another delegate, an insectoid creature whose voice buzzed through its translator, "some Kethmori must have survived somewhere. Hidden colonies in unexplored systems, escaped ships that fled to the galactic rim, individuals who went into deep hibernation." Colonel Patricia Davis stepped forward from where she had been standing quietly beside the human delegation. The woman's presence commanded immediate attention from everyone in the room. Her military bearing and the way she moved suggested someone who had seen extensive combat operations. "Our long-range reconnaissance teams have spent the past year conducting systematic sweeps of every system the Kethmori ever visited," she reported with clinical precision. "We've tracked down and eliminated every possible survivor, every hidden facility, every escape pod, and every individual who might have fled the initial extermination campaigns." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the assembled delegates like a predator evaluating potential threats. "Humans don't leave jobs unfinished. When we decide something needs to be extinct, we are extremely thorough about making sure it stays that way." The implications of her words hung heavy in the chamber's recycled air. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others made small gestures that probably represented prayers or protective rituals in their respective cultures. Dr. Rachel Harris, the chief human xenobiologist, stepped up to provide the scientific perspective. Her voice was calm and professional, but her words carried the weight of absolute finality. "The Kethmori were genuinely impressive predators," she acknowledged. "Their physical capabilities, intelligence, and coordination were remarkable by any standard. But they had never encountered a species that hunted for total elimination rather than territory or resources." She activated a small holographic display showing Earth's extinction timeline. Species after species flickered across the projection, each one marking another apex predator that no longer existed. "Humans have driven dozens of species to complete extinction on our own world, and most of those were by accident. Habitat destruction, climate change, competition for resources. When we eliminate a species intentionally, with focused effort and unlimited resources. She left the sentence unfinished, but everyone in the chamber understood the implications. Veltar's voice barely rose above the chamber's ventilation systems. What happens now? What happens to the galaxy when there are no more apex predators left to hunt? Jerome smiled, but the expression didn't reach his eyes. It was the kind of smile that made several delegates lean back in their seats. Humanity has accepted responsibility for maintaining galactic peace and security, he announced. Our fleets now patrol the former Kethmori territories and all major trade routes. We've established monitoring stations in strategic systems throughout the galaxy. He paused, making sure every delegate understood what he was saying. Any species that attempts to fill the power vacuum left behind by the Kethmori will discover why the galaxy is much safer with humans serving as the apex predator. As the session officially ended, the delegates began filing out of the chamber in contemplative silence. There was no discussion, no debate, no formal voting on resolutions. What was there to discuss? The humans had presented them with a fait accompli that changed the fundamental nature of galactic civilization. They had traded masters who killed for territory and food for guardians who eliminated entire species simply because they posed a potential threat. The galaxy was undoubtedly safer now. The question that nobody wanted to ask out loud was whether safety was worth the price they might eventually have to pay for it. In the empty chamber, Jerome stood alone looking out at the stars through the massive transparent aluminum viewport. Somewhere out there in the darkness, human ships patrolled space lanes that had been hunting grounds for millennia. Human soldiers stood guard at monitoring stations built on worlds where the Kethmori had once bred their young. Human scientists continued studying the remains of a species that had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years and been extinct for 2. The age of apex predators was truly over. Humanity had made sure of that with the same systematic thoroughness they had applied to every other problem in their history. The real question wasn't whether humanity could protect the galaxy from external threats. They had already proven that capability beyond any doubt. The question was whether the galaxy would ever need protection from its new guardians. Outside the viewport, the stars continued to shine with the same light they had cast for billions of years. But now, for the first time in galactic history, the apex predator watching them was human.